How am I? No, you can go ahead and ask Senator Skinner, how am I doing in my role as an elected official?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Interesting is a good word. It's an interesting word.
It's a different role.
It is very challenging. It's probably next to parenting teenagers, one of the challenging experiences of my life. But I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it.
Well, you can do things.
Yeah, we can do things.
So that's why we do it.
That's why
and then we go back to activism. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, no, you don't have to have one life.
Right. And with that, we are live. So thank you for joining us tonight. For folks who are paying attention from home, from YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you are, thank you for joining us this evening. We are blessed and we are excited to have Senator Nancy Skinner. We're starting a little late, so I'm just going to jump right into it. We're going to just hear about who she is, who she represents, her history of what we just heard, of activism and legislation. And so, Nancy, if I may I call you Nancy for this?
Please, you may, and I'll start out by Councilmember Fife, and then I'll call you Carroll.
Understood. So with that, Senator Skinner, please let us know just a little bit about who you are, what you do for people who may not know.
Well, I'm state senator for East Bay now, Oakland, Berkeley, Richmond, and the various cities on the I-80 corridor, starting at Hercules and Rodeo all the way down to San Leandro. And prior to that, I served in the state assembly and was, half that district. And before that, I was just interviewed by the Washington Post around the athlete's law that it was my law that basically now has resulted in the NC2A changing their rules. And when the Washington Post reporters like, well, who are you? I'm like, yeah, I'm a social justice advocate who ended up being a legislator. And, you don't have to be only one thing in life. I've had a lot of different, worked whatever in various roles, but in every single role I have ever been in my life, equity and justice has been my lens. And so it is now as a legislator also.
Thank you for sharing that. So how do you define equity and justice as a legislator? It's something that I'm finding really challenging, just balancing out different constituencies. So how would you define it and how do you achieve it?
Well, it depends on the thing you're working on, right? We can find equity, or rather, we can champion equity or justice or both in almost any policy or any budget action that we're confronted with. And so if we're looking through that lens, then what we're trying to do is take whatever that policy is. So for example, in the budget, I was chair of the budget. I am chair of the state Senate budget. And we just passed a really phenomenal budget. And it from a justice and equity lens, it gives far more benefits to our low-income Californians. It makes a huge investment in our unhoused people, and hopefully the entities who get the money will spend it well and actually produce housing for our unhoused people. But it also does some, business tax credits and things like that, I might question, say, some of the smallest businesses and the micro enterprises, yeah, they need help. Our music venues, our community theaters and such, our small dance companies, they needed help. They were really shut down by the pandemic. But there's a lot of businesses, why does California have so much money this year? Because a lot of businesses did really well, and so did the stock market. So did I love everything in that budget? No. But I managed, not me alone, it takes a village, but my colleagues and I, we fought hard. And for example, with this budget, California will be the first state in the nation that provides universal school meals. So no more does a family or a kid have to prove that they're low income and then have the stigma of being a free meal kid in order to just eat when they go to school. And we know that's so important because a hungry kid can't learn as well. And you can be hungry as a kid whether you're upper income or lower income. There's any number of reasons why you show up at school without your lunch or without any money to pay for the cafeteria. Free school, you should have free lunch, free meals, and that's what we got. So that was huge. And yet, yeah, so there was some tax breaks for business and some things maybe I didn't love, but we got a lot of other great things.
I think that's really important because, you know, coming from being an organizer, I never really referred to myself as an organizer or an activist. That those are words that the media has attributed to me, which I don't have a problem with. It, you know, it is what it is. If it helps people understand a little bit more of my advocacy, that's fine. But how do you talk to constituents about those breaks for people who are used to having things their way? How do you explain those, especially as a state legislator where people automatically assume that California, even though it's a Democratic state, is beholden to large businesses or corporations or people who don't have it hard? How do you talk to your constituents about that?
You know, some people, I think all of us are, what we're about in when we do work in the electoral space, and I'm meaning in the voting and the government space, whether we are doing it to change, to help get somebody elected or be elected ourselves, is we're trying to defy that notion that the business of America is business. Mm-hmm. And I think that we, you know, it's not perfect. And have we fully defied it? Not. But, you know, California is not 100% beholden to big business. Clearly, a lot of its revenue obviously comes from big business, but we resist them a great deal. And, you know, I'd like it if we resisted them more, and more elected legislators like me would, of course, help. But, you know, we do a lot of great things.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to talk about a couple big issues. There's some really serious issues that we're trying to combat, not just locally, but statewide. And one of those issues is housing, affordable housing, access to affordable housing, homelessness. You spoke a little bit about some of the things that were in the budget that were good things for California. Can you speak more specifically on some of the housing and homelessness things that are in the budget this year?
So the budget has $12 billion over a 2-year period, specifically for help services and housing for unhoused people, specifically unhoused people. And including that is $1 billion a year to our largest cities, $1 billion for 2 years, you know, for each year, 2 years, for our largest cities where the vast majority of our unhoused people live. That's where, you know, here in Oakland and Richmond and other cities, that's where our homeless live. And they're from here too. That's the other thing people like to pretend. No, they're right from here. So it's there but for fortune. And anybody watching this, you could become homeless too. It's hard to imagine maybe for some of you, but any of us could. And some of us have good safety nets, meaning we have, you know, a good family structure, friend structure that really helps us out when we hit hard times. And some of us don't. And the government doesn't always do such a great job of that, as we can see. Now, housing is tricky because housing, in the last, I don't know how many years, but I'd say at least 40 years, there's been far less government investing in housing. It has never been housing has never been primarily built through government funds. It's always been primarily private funds. But there's been less government funds invested in housing in, you know, the last 40 or so years. But the thing about housing is that because it's primarily private investment that produces housing, we have to work with that private investment to get the housing we need. And that's why we have laws like the density bonus, like inclusionary zoning, like various things like that, so that the person who's investing in housing, because they want to get a return on that investment, is also required to build a certain amount of affordable housing. And I bring it up because, you know, a lot of folks are like, no, don't say no market rate housing, none. However, we don't have enough government funds to build the housing we need. So we need that private sector investment, but we also need to put requirements on that private sector investment. And that's what a lot of the state laws are trying to do. And I know our local laws too.
So do you think it's possible to change the system of housing? Because, and we're going to get into moms for housing because there was legislation that you passed shortly after that to address some of the concerns that we were lifting up with the civil disobedience action that we did in Oakland. But do you think it's possible to transform our system of housing so it is more similar to some of the places around the country, like in Western Europe or even Singapore or other places, to have a form of social housing?
Well, I'd love to see more social housing, but I would say there's not that many great examples of it anywhere else in the United States.
Right.
But fundamentally, unfortunately, in California, a lot of our homeless problem is because we've not built enough. And when you have a shortage, things become very, very expensive. And in the Bay Area, if we take that as an example, with this a booming economy and all the tech jobs, you've got people who can afford to pay a lot. And when you have very little supply, then the entities that own that supply will charge what the market can bear. And I mean, this is why we put in things like rent control laws and various other things to try to put some constraints on that. But we're never going to be able to fully constrain it till we build more. We absolutely have to build more. Now, in the meantime, we're also trying to do things like my law passed that was inspired by Moms for Housing that changed the rules around how foreclosed homes are auctioned. Because the way foreclosed homes were auctioned in California was basically a giveaway to the corporate buyer, because they were auctioned off in lots, like 10 houses at a time, cash-only sales. Now, how are any of us going to buy 10 houses with the cash-only sale? We're not going to be able to compete with that. So now we changed the auction rules. Each house has to be sold one at a time, and then there's a pause after the bids are accepted. Then there's a pause, and then the tenant or the nonprofit entity or the local government, if they can meet the highest bid, then they can get that house. Now, that's also a little hard, because is the tenant going to have enough money to do that? Is the nonprofit entity, the land trust, say? Well, we just added money in the state budget to fund those entities, things like the land trusts, in order to give them the funds to be able to compete in those foreclosed auctions.
So how much I think that's a great step. It's something that didn't exist before. No. How much was put in the budget for housing acquisition?
I should have all these numbers off the top of my head, but I have so many numbers from that massive budget. I'm not remembering the exact dollar amount, but I bet you there's someone on watching who remembers, because there were a lot of our good advocates in the Oakland area who were really following that funding. But in terms of acquisition, there's money in that fund for the foreclosed homes. There's also money to low-income homeowners to be able to build an ADU, because we know the ADUs are the accessory dwelling units. And there's a lot of low-income homeowners who have homes that they could easily accommodate in the ADU. And of course, having that ADU would provide them some rental income, which would give them some security in that home. But they might not have great credit, or their equity may not be high enough yet in the house. So they don't have the way to get the capital to build the ADU. Well, so we've created a loan fund for like very, very low interest, only for the lowest income homeowners to be able to build ADUs. That's another example.
So can you tell us a little bit about what your thinking was around SB 79? Because that is the legislation that came out of this saga that we were having with a corporate speculator who was and is currently buying up hundreds of units and then auctioning them off to the highest bidder.
So that speculator, that was Wedgwood, but we know there were many others. Blackstone was another. Blackstone, after the ridiculous, they call it a housing crisis. No, it's the big banks and the mortgage companies basically fleeced low-income homeowners. And when they fleeced the low-income homeowners and all those homes went into foreclosure, then Wall Street created a whole new kind of equity category, which was single-family home rentals. Before that, these corporate interests weren't ever interested in operating single-family homes for rent. But they bought up a lot. Then they, of course, had really bad lease policies and charged very high rents. But then they started pulling out of the market. But what we wanted to prevent, well, we've not totally prevented it, but we wanted to kind of at least put a little halt on if we face some foreclosures due to this pandemic, then we don't want those entities to just be able to grab up our homes in Richmond and Oakland and other communities here. So that was the motivation.
What do you say? Because shortly after that legislation became public and I started seeing articles about it, I saw journalists say that that's not an issue in California. That the market or the aspect of the market and the people who would benefit from this particular piece of legislation won't see a benefit from that because there are not that many units in the housing stock to where that would make a realizable difference.
So we haven't seen a huge wave of foreclosures like we did after that last recession, but we could. Right. And we've already had one great homeowner who was she was a tenant who worked for Berkeley Unified School District, lived in the city of Pinole, and she just managed with one of our land trusts, Northern California Land Trusts, to purchase the home that she had rented. She and her mother had rented for years and years. So we already know it can work, and it is working, and we hope it keeps working for lots more families.
Do you believe that we'll see, once the moratorium ends around California, do you think that we'll see this wave of foreclosures where this legislation could benefit people? Hopefully not, but
I don't want to see that wave of foreclosures. Right. But partly, so, in the role that I'm in now, what I'm trying to do is either my staff and I or good people like Moms for Housing bring us good ideas for legislation or good ideas for the budget, then I shepherd them. And then I'm dependent on other people. Once I get it into place, then I need all of you to make sure it works.
Do you hear that, people? Are you listening? We're needed. We're needed to make sure that. So what does that look like? I've heard Congresswoman Barbara Lee say that's street heat. What is that needing people?
It's more than just street heat. It's also like, the land trust, once we did that legislation, they said, hey, this is great legislation, but we don't always have the ability to get that cash fast to buy that house. So, can you create a state fund for us? And that's what we did in the budget. So it's the folks who are trying to think of, all right, how are we going to apply this law best? Or how are we going to apply this new either regulation or program? And then they come back to us and say, look, we need this help in order for it to really work right.
Got it. So bring good information, bring good ideas. You're going to turn it into some stuff. And then
I'll do my best.
Okay. And I know we don't have you for long this evening.
Yeah, I have to get off in like 3 minutes. So.
Yeah, you have another commitment. But what would you say is your vision for your district? Where do you want to see us a year from now and by the end of your term?
Well, I would love in a year from now to have no more encampments and to have all our unhoused people housed. Are we going to be able to pull that off? I don't know. But I certainly want to see that by the time I'm out of office. And I will have this Senate seat until 2024. And I will hopefully be able to stay as budget chair for a few more years, and I can keep fighting for money to invest in helping house our people. And so that's really, really important to me. And then within healthcare, each year we have to kind of shape. This year, for example, Senator Maria Elena Durazo and I and others, we didn't know if we could pull off being able to provide to every Californian 50 and over who is age 50 and over who's eligible to be able to get Medi-Cal. Doesn't matter. If you're a California resident, we don't care about your status. You deserve health care. And we pulled that off. That's in the budget. Every single Californian 50 plus who is income eligible for Medi-Cal now can have Medi-Cal. that's, we felt good about that. And then we just did some great things to deal with the horrible and systemic racist circumstances that are pervasive through every institution in our culture, where Black mothers have the highest mortality rate during maternal mortality, and Black infants the highest infant mortality rate. Now, what kind of absurdity is that in a rich state like we have with the kind of healthcare system we have? So we were just able to pass in the budget large portions of my momnibus bill, and my momnibus bill mirrors the momnibus effort that Barbara Lee, Congresswoman Lee, and others in Congress are trying to do, which is to extend pregnancy and postpartum support and payment, and eliminate the work requirement that we've had on our low-income pregnant mothers, and various things like that. So hopefully we can begin to address this ridiculous disparity.
I didn't know about that
disparity.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with that, but it's definitely something I want to get in on. So I'm not going to hold you. I know you have another event. I appreciate the time that you were able to just run in and check in with us really quickly, and we will be in conversation. So thank you, Senator Nancy Skinner.
You're welcome, Councilmember 5, Carroll. And I look forward to interacting with you again. And I hope you enjoy your role governing the city of Oakland.
Yeah, I'm working towards that. We'll see. We'll see what happens. All right. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye. All right. So that was fast and very informative around some of the things that are in the California state budget and some money that's coming directly to Oakland. I'm going to say a couple things because it was informative, and I want to push farther. I just got to say it. We've got to completely reimagine how we see housing, how we engage with homelessness. And I'm glad that we're taking some steps forward, but the fact that people still have to compete in the housing market, that's not housing as a human right. We need to make housing a human right in the same way that the senator just talked about making healthcare accessible to everyone over 50. If people have to compete and still pay the highest bid to be able to live in a space, that's still not equity. We need social housing. And just because there are no other places in the country where it's actively being modeled doesn't mean that we shouldn't be shooting for the stars. I argue that we should. And if we continue along the path, and I feel like I'm saying that a lot lately, especially around public safety, if we continue on the path that we've been on, then we're going to keep getting what we're getting. So nonprofits having to compete to be able to keep people in their homes or to get people housed, but still paying market rates, that's not justice. In Oakland, houses are selling for over $900,000. I don't have that kind of money. Most of the people I know don't have that kind of money. So what are we actually doing? So yeah, we have a lot further to go. And if you take anything away from the conversation that we just had, it is the street heat that's helping to push things. It was street heat that got me elected, and it will be street heat and organizing from the grassroots to get any kind of the transformative change that we deserve as humans on the planet. It's going to take organizing. So for everyone who tuned in to listen tonight for our quick drive-through by Senator Nancy Skinner, please take that from this discussion, that it is organizing and only organizing that's consistent and persistent and deep love for people that will take us to where we need to go. So with that, happy Thursday.